spiral dynamics, which is simply a system of taking a look at values, the values that we hold as individuals, but also values that we hold as cultures and as societies, and as the larger group of human beings. And as you can see over there in that simple sort of graphic, there are several different layers to this spiral. And we kind of described each of them a little bit last week. But this week, we're going to go into a little more about the basics of how the spiral is constructed and what that actually means to us. So once again, I'm going to share this particular quote with you because it was important enough that the author of the book that I've been working from included it in a couple places. And it's a reminder to us that life does not remain static. We are either evolving or we're devolving. We're either going onward or we're going away. The law of evolution governs life on Earth. No form of life can remain unchanged for long without crystallizing and disappearing. Laura, when she is directing a play, always likes to tell kids over and over again that you're either getting better or you're getting worse. And I think that certainly applies here. So one of the things that we have to remember is that human nature is not fixed. We don't just get to a plateau. I remember when I first got into the real estate information business. This is back in the 90s. And we were having a company-wide meeting via phone call. It's funny. It was like an early, it was a conference call, kind of like this without the video. And Jim Sherry, who was one of the pioneers in the industry, he was our company president at the time, and he was letting us know. He's like, listen, folks, up till now, what we've seen with technology is, you'll climb a mountain and then you'll get to a plateau, and then we'll all be able to kind of get comfortable with, whatever technology we have, and then we're going to get to another mountain and have to climb again. He said, folks, the plateaus are gone. From this point forward, it's going to be nothing but climbing a mountain. And he wasn't wrong. But in terms of the spiral, what we have to remember is that we do have the ability to change, to upgrade, to recalibrate ourselves in response to changes in conditions, because our environment is not going to stay the same. And I love this picture. This is a picture of a guy who was an athlete, and he lost his left leg. And, rather than allow that change in condition to stop what he was doing, he's staying in touch with his older way of being. He's still going to be an athlete. He's just going to be doing it in a different way than he used to. And I like that that it reminds us that we can be at different levels in our work, family, and personal life. I think about, and this goes back to when I was still in active alcoholism. I seemed to be very squared away from 9 to 5. I was, what they call a functional alcoholic. But boy, did my family ever get a bunch of dysfunction. So we can kind of be at different levels in a lot of different ways as we go along. So the way that things interact with us can be measured, these 4 ways. The V memes, and if you remember, those are value memes, and value memes are those collections of values that make up those colored layers, the values that represent the layers of beige or of purple, right? So each one of those containers is the product of the interaction of our human intelligence with our life conditions. And those life conditions can kind of be looked at in these particular four ways as times, place, problems, and circumstances. And the way that that kind of breaks out and affects how our values evolve. So there's times, and this is key. Change is faster in some places and slower than others. And, in this example here, I actually have two places that are both in the United States of America. Um, One is a street on New York City where change seems to happen very quickly, along with everything else. And the other is a small family home in Appalachia. And change doesn't seem to happen there real quickly at all. Um, but it absolutely is true that change is faster in some places and slower than others. We still have on this planet Aboriginal or indigenous tribes that are living way back in maybe even in beige, just like scrabbling for existence. It's a huge gap, and it's something that we have to be mindful of when we are dealing with people from other cultures or whose value meme was formed in another culture. And certainly physical conditions, the places, um, can have a tremendous impact. I chose these two photographs because I've lived in both of these places, and I'll tell you, it's like being on a different planet. The left one is Santa Barbara, California, and the right is the desert in Kuwait, a few miles from the first base that I was stationed at. That's actually a little section that was part of the highway of death from the first Gulf War. When I was there in 2010, you could still see it. Uh, but by the time I went back in 17 and 18, the sand had pretty much swallowed it up. Um, but it is extremely jarring sometimes, the differences in place and certainly the effects that place can have on us. Um, the value of water. I was reading earlier this week that there are still over 2 million Americans that do not have access to running water. I mean, we're not talking about bad drinking water like those poor people in Flint have been putting up with. We're talking about people who have no running water whatsoever. Um, and it impacts everything that they do. Basically, one of the huge tasks for each and every day is we have to go get enough water to make sure we're going to be able to survive. Um, and how that affects our values, it automatically drags us back towards beige because it's basic survival, right? So one of the other things, and it's a huge effect on our values, is the kind of problems that we encounter, and specifically the needs and fears of the group of which we are a part. And, as I put in parentheses here, I can have a whole lot more pictures. I mean, and I did include some people who are, that I disagree with, just by way of example. They're people of, people afraid of being told what to do, essentially being they're afraid of being told go out and wear a mask when you go to Costco. But we have people who are, they need health care. We have people who need to be treated justly. We have people who need water, for crying out loud. We have people with all sorts of needs and fears. So the combinations of issues that many of us face, and not only that many of us face, but many of us who are privileged enough not to be facing those problems recognize, affect the values that we hold and the actions that we take based on those values. And kind of, diving a little more deeply into that, the fourth piece of this is our circumstances. And we're looking at our social roles, our educational level, our gender, race, appearance, our inner life, whether we were brought up agnostic or Catholic or, whatever it might have been. So many things affect the values that we hold. And, quite frankly, a lot of the time we don't even know that we are holding on to certain values. I think that's one of the definitions of privilege is assuming that certain values are just the way things are because that's the way things are for us. And kind of not being able to see outside of the box that we live in. But specifically what we're talking about here is how we as individuals and we as a whole, or even as groups, how we respond to the pressures of change. And not just how we respond, but how our values respond. Because that's really a couple of different things. So when life conditions change, whether it's from something as drastic as war or economic conditions. It's funny, they cited economics or natural causes, and we're seeing right now how those two things can be intricately tied together because certainly the natural cause of the COVID-19 pandemic is having a tremendous economic impact. And that is, in return, making a difference in how a lot of people are dealing with the natural condition of the pandemic. But those memes, they emerge, surge, regress. They kind of move into our consciousness and move out. And I love the way that this particular graphic puts it, that the difference between change and transformation is change is simply a shift in behaviors, whereas transformation is a shift in values. I think that oftentimes it's inconvenience will cause us to change behaviors, but something that becomes intolerable causes us to shift our values. So when that new level is activated, we don't just have the ability to change the way that we think about things, but actually the underlying values that we hold and step into a new way of being, not just a new way of doing. So some interesting things about the way that the spiral is constructed. So the value memes go back and forth between expressive and self-sacrificing, or between individualistic and self-sacrificing. And the warm colors represent individual expression, self-expression, kind of focusing ourselves on the outside world, whereas the cool colors are more collective, sacrificial, surrendering of self-interest, for the good of the communal and collective whole. And the little graphic I found doesn't have beige on there, but certainly survival is kind of an individualistic response to our environment. Whereas you move from beige to purple, which is about group belonging and so forth. And it kind of pings back and forth. It's like every time we absorb something as a whole, we as individuals, or we grab for an individual value that ratchets it up, but then we have to find a way of sharing that with the group, and it just goes back and forth. Another thing to remember about how the values memes, how they show up and how they linger is that they emerge along the spiral in what is described as a wave-like fashion. And if you know remember what it's like being at the beach, it's funny out there unless there's a storm going on. Usually out in the deeper water, you can tell there's little waves, but they're not really like big breaking waves. They're more like ripples as they're coming towards the land. And then as they get into shallower water, the wave forms up and it becomes like a really big pretty wave, and it's like, oh, I could surf on that. And then of course, but when they get to the beach, they they crash on the beach, and then just the water just swooshes forward and gets sucked back into the ocean. So in that same sort of fashion, these memes have like an entering phase where it's the momentum is growing, and then there's this peak phase where, oh, it's like, oh, look, here's where we are. Oh, there's a wave. I can tell. Look, there's a wave. But then they disintegrate and this is key, as the problems that are encountered by life within that value meme outstrip the capacity to deal with them. And another thing I like about this particular graphic is that it demonstrates that even though, say beige and purple may have crashed on the shore a long time ago, they're still down there. We could be living in orange or green, or, if we're highly squared away, maybe we've even made it to the second tier and we're living in yellow or turquoise, but underneath there, we still have this kind of undercurrent, that includes but transcends the other value memes. We are experiencing a period of extreme unrest and instability. And when we are in a period like that, like it is right now, most people and the media tend to focus on what's going wrong, right? But the thing that we have to remember is that the answer is coming. That there is an energy that is bringing about a better way of, not just of doing things, but a better way of being, right? And so as it says here, the new era grows strongly, drawing on untapped potential, mostly unseen, though sometimes attacked by the previous system, and yes, boy, it is, while it prepares to, quote, suddenly, unquote, burst on the scene. When the truth is, if you look at some of the things that I found in this graphic, when we actually fix some of the things that need to be fixed, it may seem sudden to some people. Just as for example, same-sex marriage, when the Supreme Court said, yeah, that's the law of the land, that seemed like it was really sudden to some people. But for those people who have been fighting for that justice, in that space for literally decades, it wasn't sudden at all. It has been a long, slow go of it. And whether it's, members of the Black community or people who are concerned about the environment, women, Native Americans, the disabled, as things happen that involve those communities and involve greater justice for those communities, it may seem sudden for some people. I mean, the Equal Rights Amendment, we've been working on that for, what is it, 37 years? Most of my life. But the answers, the higher value meme, the new way of being, when they appear, they don't just come out of nowhere. They absolutely grow out of what has come before. And it's important to remember that that foundation, it has to be there. The things we couldn't, those of us maybe who are like, let's say, if I say, yeah, I'm probably green, maybe in most of the things in my life, maybe, right? But I couldn't be green if I hadn't, worked my way through orange and blue, et cetera, right? The memes all build on what went before, but they give us new levels of complexity and more diversity in organization and more alternative ways of doing things, more freedom in relationships. But this is really key. It is impossible to jump to a value meme we think we would prefer. And I think that's a lesson that shows why we've had such difficulty when we go and try to export democracy around the world. There are a lot of places on this planet that are still somewhere between beige and red. And we have gone adventuristically in there, basically trying to sell them on an orange way of being. And they're not ready for it. And we're not going to be successful because we don't understand that. Again, if you remember, everybody in the first tier, we think that everybody should think the way that we think. We think they're wrong if we don't think the way that we think. And one of the, again, one of those things, I guess it's another way of being privileged is, if you live in an orange/green society and you just assume that somebody that's living in red should be like you. They're not going to be like you until they move, from red to blue, from blue to orange, and on up. It's evolution. We didn't go from being Cro-Magnon man to the people that we are today. We had to evolve. And that's one of the things that's important to remember. People still have to evolve, and it's not just physically, it's also in the values that we hold. But having said that, one of the things that the second tier teaches us is that we don't just transcend, we also include. So a meme stack is a cross section of the spiral. It's like looking down through the spiral and seeing all of those colors, that are still within the spiral from the plateau that we're at. So that transcend and include don't mean replace. That means even at whatever level we're at now, we may have some of the positive aspects of some of those other memes, as we go, and we may still work with them as part of our daily lives. Red, is participating in competitive sports. And I've got a picture of my precious wife, Laura, as she was finishing a Mercedes half marathon. And, really, I mean, just using her as an example, she does all these things right here, just like many of us do. She participates, she goes out and, runs competitively. She meditates. And, like just
I meditate very badly.
But you meditate. Like I always tell people who are new in AA, trying to meditate is meditating. Family celebration. We just had one of those Friday night for Abby, who just finished all of her classwork from high school. So even though we might be tempted to look down on those lower layers of the spiral, I mean, you look down at beige, right, which is the survival layer, but I tell you what, we've got some extra dry goods and some extra water and some extra toilet paper stored up here, because when things get tough, it's like, well, what do we have to do to survive? Having lived in Florida, we all had a hurricane box, right? So there are values that we can kind of hang on to and bring with us as we move up through the spiral, because they're not throwaway values. They become a part of who we are. So, and again, I had mentioned this before, but the memes, the way that this system is set up is they cluster in groups of 6. And the thing that differentiates the first tier and the second tier is that in the first tier, which is beige, purple, red, blue, orange, and green, no one in each of those tiers can fully understand or appreciate the other worldviews. That's kind of the, hey, we've got it right and they've got it wrong worldview, which I would say that the nation we live in right now is fully within the first tier, because, for the most part, everybody is either with us or you're against us, right? In the second tier, yellow and turquoise, they embrace what came before, transcend and include. And I find it interesting. A couple of the people that work with this claim that a new mean, coral, exists, but that it lacks a sufficient number of people to be statistically meaningful. I couldn't even find a definition of what coral is. They just it's running around out there apparently, but apparently, according to the way that this was originally set up, that second tier will also embrace 6 means, but beyond that, way out there, there's supposed to be a third tier. And what Ken Wilber said, that there's a third tier of consciousness that fully realized beings like the Buddha and Jesus and Muhammad evolved to. And I love this. Non-dual consciousness and universal love and compassion characterize this level of consciousness. So oneness, universal love, and compassion. And boy, if we've ever wondered why we've not caught up to where Jesus was at, this is a great way of explaining that. It's like that dude was so far out in front of us, we've got another like 9 colors to go through to catch up with him. But that doesn't mean we don't want to try, So I wanted to share this with you. Claire Graves, who was the person who did the first work on the spiral, back in 1974, foresaw 3 different possibilities. The first one was a massive regression to beige and purple if we fail to stabilize our weapons and endangered resources. We weren't talking about global warming back in 1974, but boy, is that ever something that we need to be talking about now, and I found this photo of people who even, maybe today are still having to go to a big communal watering hole out in the desert just to get a bucket of water. I'd like to fix it so nobody has to do that. And it sure would not look good for us if we all end up back in that kind of situation. The second thing Graves foresaw was a version of Orwell's 1984 embodied in the blue, orange, green neck of the woods, a tyrannical, manipulative government with glossed over communitarian overtones. And we are certainly seeing evidence that that is a possibility that if we're not careful, we're going to end up stuck with. And then the third possibility that he foresaw was the emergence of a second tier approach to business and society equipped to act locally and plan globally while acting globally and planning locally at the same time. And the thing is as I was describing the way that the memes emerge, like a wave that's coming up, we're seeing a wave of this it's not the majority yet, and it's not what's in power yet. But if we continue to be active and to be proactive, I think it's still it's still a possibility, and it sure beats the heck out of this and this. So when we talk about planning globally and acting locally and vice versa, I wanted to do this. I wanted us to do this together. So a project for this week. Could we think of some sort of think globally, act locally project that we can adopt as a spiritual community and embrace and work on right now? When I say right now, I don't just mean generically right now. I mean, even right now, like like it says in this graphic, can we do it from home? Can we do good somewhere in some way, thinking globally, acting locally, even with the constraints on our activities as they are today? So, put on your thinking cap, jump onto Google, and just let's all try to come back next week and see if we can come up with some way of being part of the wave that brings about what we would rather have instead of some of the alternatives. So that's about it for this week. And again, I owe a lot of the material that I used to the book Emergence, and it is easily available on Kindle. And there's a lot of good stuff in it. This is just volume one, and we'll see. I've got enough material in here for at least another week. Beyond that, I might want to go back into maybe a little something different. But if you guys really love sticking with it, we can I'll get volume two and we'll drill down even deeper. So, but again, I would be remiss if I did not give credit where it's due. So